Welcome to the JWST Cycle 4 webinar and Q&A for budget proposers and their institution. So I'm Paula Sessa, Head of Grants Administration, and you have support from the GRA team and Tom Brown, the JWST Mission Head, and Neil Reed, the Multi-Mission Project Scientist. Today, we're going to highlight significant changes from previous cycles and key areas to help with a successful budget preparation, but mostly it's a session to give you an opportunity to ask us questions. So for the veteran proposers out there, especially take note of the significant changes that we're talking about. For the first-time proposers, you won't really have a comparison to previous cycles, so this should be pretty straightforward for you and be all-star submitters. Just a reminder that the budget deadline is May 8th. And if you have questions or need help, contact your sponsor programs office first. Be sure that you know your institution's internal deadlines. You don't want to get caught at the end and have your institution say, no, they don't have enough time to put it through all the proposal processes on your end. And you can also contact us at Grants Administration. We are here to help you anytime. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We're happy to help. We love to help beforehand instead of run into problems afterwards. So do take advantage of those resources. The takeaways on funding and program allocations for Cycle 4 are more hours are allocated in Cycle 4 than in Cycle 3. But the funding level remains the same at $60 million. Notable change is that we've moved to a formula-based approach to determine allocations for each program. The funding amount in the budget letter that everyone received is the amount available. No extra funding is available, so we are not accepting requests for appeals or reconsiderations. So if you proposed for a JWST or an HST budget in previous cycles, note that there are significant changes to the budget requirements and to the review process. So the budget narrative now has page limits and detailed instructions, hopefully with the result of requiring less effort on your part to submit the budget proposal. Budgets will undergo a preliminary check for adherence to submission requirements. This is new. That check will be done by Grants Administration. Talk a little bit about that later. So that preliminary check, it's similar to the science proposal process in that if the budget is not compliant with the submission requirements, the budget will be denied. However, there will be an opportunity to submit a compliant budget for review at a later FRC. It won't be reviewed in July. Let's see. Unallowable costs will be flagged. Program admin PIs will need to distribute those costs to an allowable activity. And reductions to the budget there should be very few. Those would only occur if costs are significantly unreasonable or if the PI is not eligible to receive funding. Oh, another bonus is that the narrative instrument information has been removed. It's no longer the responsibility of the program admin PI because the information is auto-populated in STGMS. Everybody's very happy about that. Okay, slide 6. So you may ask why you have to submit a budget proposal when the program already received a not to exceed funding allocation. So we would love to give you the money with no strings attached. However, the federal government requires a detailed budget proposal and plan for all. And that is part of our job in Grants Administration is we are here to ensure that federal regulations are adhered to. If they're not, you get in trouble, we get in trouble, no one's happy. So the budget proposal has two parts. There's the actual budget, which is a line-by-line breakout of the costs needed to complete the project, and the narrative, which is a clear, concise description of the work and why each cost is needed. Okay, and then there are two stages to the review process. The first stage is an initial check for compliance by GRA. What GRA is looking for is that the budget proposal is compliant with the submission requirements, meaning it does not exceed the maximum funded allocation. It uses the narrative template. It complies with the page limits, completes all sections of the template. Non-compliant budgets will be denied, again, not to be reviewed at the July FRC meeting, but will be given an opportunity to submit a compliant budget for review at a later interim FRC. So the second stage of the review process is by a financial review committee to verify that costs are in scope, allowable, and reasonable. This goes back to the requirement from the federal government that grantee sponsoring institutions actually have to go through these checks to ensure that all costs are compliant with federal law. Within scope, costs are in scope if they align with the goals and work in the science proposal only. So if you are proposing for work that was not included in the science proposal, it is unallowable, and we will ask you to remove those costs from the budget, reallocate those costs to another allowable activity on the program. The biggest areas where we see creep into the budget proposal, where work was not included in the phase one, is ground-based observations, lab work, and reduction of ancillary data. So again, if you have those in the budget, they must have been discussed in the science proposal. And also effort for observing preparations. So allowable costs must be allowable. You can reference the general grant provisions, but most unallowable costs we see are, the biggest one probably is funding for non-US investigators. These are kind of in order. Prep work for future proposals, work for phase two prep. You can run down the list. These are the most common costs we see that we have to flag as unallowable. We return the budget to you. Those costs have to be removed. You get to submit a revised budget. Reasonable. So costs must be reasonable and in the general range expected for the work. This guidance was provided in the budget notification letter. The travel is generally anticipated at $15K or less, or 10% of the total budget. Publications at $10K or less, or 5% of the total budget. The work distribution also has to be reasonable. Another area where we see issues are when a budget proposal does not explain the contributions made by the non-US investigators. We expect that if there are non-US investigators on the program, that they will be contributing work, that their work would be summarized briefly in the effort table, and it would be described in the narrative. The reviews generally are not going to consider the distribution of effort among US investigators unless we see a program that is predominantly foreign and then has a US investigator carrying the majority of the work and the costs. And in that case, we wouldn't consider that to be reasonable, right? Unless it's a majority non-US proposal and the US team, small, 1, 2, maybe 3 people, are doing a very small part of the work to support, in support of the work that the non-US investigators are doing, but we don't want to carry the lion's share. Here again, PIs will be asked to revise budget to redistribute flagged costs. So there could be rare instances where there are top line reductions from the budget, but those will be made only if the costs are deemed significantly unreasonable. And again, if an investigator is not eligible to receive funding. So common pitfalls, we talked about some of these. The budget narrative didn't comply with the directions in the narrative template. We have very specific directions in the narrative template. If anyone has any questions about those, just ask us. In the budget narrative, we don't need volumes. There are page limits. We don't need volumes of information, but we do need rationale for the requested costs. And it needs to be concise and clear. And there needs to be a description for everyone on the team, US and non-US funded and unfunded. Right, so areas that are weak is if there are little or no description of why each cost is needed, or if there is incomplete information or no justification at all. That will get kicked back. We will ask for more information. Also, oftentimes there's inconsistent information between the budget effort table and the actual budget line item itself, and then the budget narrative. So we might see different numbers for labor, for instance, in the budget. Someone might be asking for 5 months, but in the effort table, it says 2.5 months, but then in the budget narrative, it says 6 months. So I would caution that I think many of those inconsistencies likely occur in the sponsored programs offices, not because they're necessarily doing anything wrong, but because they aren't sure how to interpret the data to put into the tables. So it really helps if the proposer is working with the sponsored programs office to make sure that information is complete, and also to do a double check before the button is pushed to submit that proposal. The main goal here for everyone is that we get a proposal in that is great. It goes through with flying colors. You get the, hey, your final approval for the total amount is approved, and everybody's happy. You have to do less work. We do less work. Okay. Post FRC. So after the review, notifications are sent to the program MMPIs and their institutions, and again, the program budget would either be approved, or we will send a letter that says that the budget needs revision, and we will describe what in the budget needs to be revised. After final budget approval, an official grant award document will be issued to each funded investigators institution. So we don't issue award to PI institution to then be sub-awarded to COI institutions. Each institution gets their own. ARs are awarded at the beginning of the cycle, and GOs after successful observation. Next, so here's a list of resource documents that should help put your budget proposal together. Again, if you're going through any of this information and you have questions, please do ask us. We are here to help you and to get you through a successful proposal submission. So again, the recording of the session will be posted to the GRA webpage and the JWebbinar webpage. So I know I ran through most of this quickly, but I really wanted to hit the high points and not get too down in the weeds with information. And I wanted to leave plenty of time for you to ask questions of us. Any questions out there?
So Paula, we had a question online. So section 3 in the budget narrative template has different page requirements for a PI versus a COI. The page limit for COI is 1 page, and then the page limit for a PI is 4 pages. The question is, if they are a PI, is the page limit 4 pages or is it 5 pages to include the COI portion?
5 pages.
5 pages. Great, thank you. And we also had another question online. Will attendees have access to the slides as well as the recorded presentation?
Both, yes. So both will be posted, the slides and the presentation, to those two. Actually, it'll be posted to more places, but yeah, the DRA webpage for sure, and the JWebbinar page, sure. We'll have links to both. Great.
Those were the 2 questions. Oh, we just got another one in. We got a few more in, so I'll share them as they roll in. Could you please share the details of the formula used for the legacy AR?
Neil?
I could answer that. It's a flat rate for ARs and legacy ARs. If you look at the presentation to the JStuck, that lists the details there. But it's basically a flat rate funding for ARs, and actually surveys and the legacy.
I will add, let me check the resource documents. I will add the JStuck presentation to the resource documents. This is the JStuck meeting that just took place last week. So there are slides that run through formulaic information, information about the ARs, information about the plan for cycle 4, but the JStuck hasn't submitted their final report. However, you do have access to those slides.
All right, I will keep rolling through the questions online. Next question, are the provided not to exceed dollar amounts already adjusted based on the number of US-based and non-US based investigators on the proposal?
I can take that one too. The answer is no. I think the important thing to recognize with the funding the way it is now is that we know up front we're not funding all the science that can be done with any of these programs. That's part of the reasons why there's no appeal, because everybody could appeal and then you're just going in circles. The way that we've divided up the funding is based on the total time allocated to the program. I think the expectation is that, and most programs have a reasonably easy, even distribution of US and non-US investigators. So the expectation is that in almost every case, you will be able to provide a suitable justification for work done by the US-based investigators with the funding that's been allocated. There may be a few rare cases where it really is imbalanced, but that's kind of where we are now. So the funding is based on the type of program or the total amount of time charge duration on the telescope.
Great. Next question is, in the budget narrative template in section 3, so that's the program planning and execution section, part 2, which is the all investigators requirement, of the 4-page section is almost identical to the first requirement of the 1-page section. What is the difference between these? So in other words, what is the difference between the PI requirement and the COI requirement?
So the OI requirement is a description of the specific activities at their institution, and the PI requirement is a description of the broader program.
All right, next question. Can the scientific scope described in the budget narrative be smaller than what was proposed? This question applies to a theory program where the amount of funding was not specified at the time of proposal, and the accepted proposal may have a larger a scope larger than what could be performed given the actual funding level for the program.
Yes, it can be smaller than what was proposed.
Okay, great.
And let me just add to that too. Sorry, Casey. So I think that there will be many instances where a TAC-approved program had science goals and objectives that will not be able to be fully accomplished with the amount of funding allocated for the program, in which case the budget proposal would be smaller in scope than what was proposed in the phase one.
All right, great. Next question. So the contributions of all unfunded non-US must be described. Does that only apply to contributions greater than 5%? Let's see. Could you clarify if the caps were given for budgets are before or after overheads are considered?
They include overheads. Budget caps would include the overheads applied by the institution.
Great. What if the US admin moves to another US institution after the May 8th deadline? If the budget is approved, can it get transferred to the new US institution? And the answer to that is yes, it can. Give us a call and we can help you walk through the specific process for that situation. I am a civil servant at a NASA center, so we presumably cannot get funding directly from STSEI. How is the funding provided to a NASA center? Is the funding proposal process different for NASA centers?
Funding proposal process is exactly the same. Where the process veers is where the actual funding is awarded to the institution. So Space Telescope, for non-government agencies, Space Telescope is able to make an award directly from STSEI directly to that institution. For federal agencies, Space Telescope makes the award, however, the funding vehicle is managed through NASA. I will, with the caveat that if funding is going to a federal institution and depending on that institution, it can take quite an amount of time for the funding to actually reach that institution. So just be aware.
All right, next question we have is about visas. If attending a conference requires a visa, I'm struggling to see why this is not a coverable expense.
Yeah, attending a conference, a visa costs to attend a conference are allowable. It's visa costs for people coming into the United States and then having to get visa renewals when their visas are up here, and then they have to go back and get renewals. So if a visa is required to attend a conference, that cost is covered.
Great, thanks. The next question is about publications. Can I request publication support for a paper that US investigators contribute significantly, so 50%, but whose first author is a non-US investigator?
Yeah. If they're asking for proportional support, so it sounds like this question is based on US team contributing 50% to the paper, and would it be reasonable for them to budget for 50% of the publication cost? The answer would be yes.
A necessary analysis task is described in the phase one, but the phase one doesn't specifically mention, described in the phase one JWST GEO proposal, but the phase one doesn't specifically mention HST. Can this task be supported in the budget if it needs HST data, or will the keyword HST cause a disqualification of the task?
So the answer would be if the HST data for the work supporting HST was not included in the phase 1, then those costs would not be eligible for support in the JWST budget.
All right, next question. Are there any anticipated changes to the maximum IDC rate, say down to 15%, which might be at variance with institution negotiated rates?
We have not been given direction that IDC rates will be reduced. So far, all of the institutions that we are working with are operating with their full IDC rates. To date, we have not received any information from NASA or above that this will change.
All right, so the next question is about COI budgets. Just to be clear, each COI submits their own budget, and that is correct. If you would like to request support, you would submit a budget through your institution. The next question is, will the grants be distributed in portions? Would it be possible to get the grant in one piece?
Grants are distributed with 20% of the total funding up front. If a grant value is $50,000 or less, if the grant is $50,000 or less, then we issue the full $50,000 up front. If it's higher, funding comes in 20% increments, right? When that first 20% is expended, you get the next 20% increment. However, if you're in a situation where that 20% is not going to cover the work that you need to do in the immediate future, let us know. There's always the option for early release of incremental funding, but we won't release the total funding amount of the grant. That would be very unusual for us to do that. But we can work with you to make sure that funding is provided as it's needed. So if your institution is saying, no, you've reached the max, we only have so much to spend, you can't do anything else, call us and we'll sort that out. We can get more funding to you.
Great. And just a minor clarification. So grants $30,000 and $1 to $50,000 is obligated in 50% increments, and then anything less than $30,000 is awarded 100%. Next question from a first-time budget submitter. Am I correct in that I need to contact my institution's SPO in order to get access to STGMS, and from there the tools I need to create my budget proposal? You can work with your SPO to get you enabled. If you have any issues with that, feel free to give us a call or send us an email and we'll be happy to walk you through. And then the budget is submitted in STGMS using the budget item in the main menu. We also have the STSCI budget proposer guide, which walks you through that process, and I will share that in the chat shortly, a link to that. The next question is, since AR proposals are awarded at the start of the cycle, does that mean that we can choose July 1, 2025 as a start date? I ask because the FRC is in July, which is after the cycle start date.
Right. So the cycle start date that is included in the budget is a best guesstimate, and usually institutions choose a start date that align with their current negotiated cost rates. So if there is a July 1st start date stated in a budget, no, it won't be awarded July 1st, but it will be awarded as soon as the budget review process is over, everything is approved, and then we're ready. And as long as overdue reports are submitted and up to date. Right, so, but for ARs, yeah, they're in. And then for GOs, same situation, GOs would be awarded after first successful first observation.
So the next question is about awards for GEO programs. So I'll just follow on Paula's comment there. We award after the receipt of successful first observations. Our next question is about publications. Do all publications funded through STSCI resources have to be published in open access journals? And the answer to that question is no. They do not have to be open access. The next question we have, if the TAC approved program has objectives which will not be fully accomplished by the program because of the limited allocated budget, does the budget narrative have to explicitly address and discuss the objectives that will not be or are only partially accomplished?
The budget narrative should describe the work that you're doing, not the work that you can't do. I mean, we will be able to, if necessary, compare against the original proposal to make sure that the work is in scope. But I think it is not profitable for anyone to spend space describing the work that you can't do.
We have a question about the period of performance. So can I confirm that 3 years is the standard maximum duration for the GEO grant, barring a no-cost extension? And then is the start date of the grant when observations are taken or when data is made available to the PI? So we address part of this. We award our grants with a 3-year period of performance. A no-cost extension may be requested. And then we address the start date for GEO programs, which is after receipt of successful first observations. The next question, what if some US COI, even if it's the PI who asked for funding, decided to move outside of the US later? How would that influence the budget proposal preparation at this moment?
PI knows that they're going to be leaving the US.
It's not clear from the way the question's worded.
Yeah, could we get clarification on that question? Because there are so many different scenarios, there are many different flavors.
Okay, we got clarification. So just the possibility, it is not decided at this point in time.
So I would have the investigator submit a proposal through their US institution. If at some point prior to award or during the period of performance, they transfer to a non-US institution and are not maintaining some type of affiliation, state affiliation with the US institution, then there are options for dispensation for the funding. If there are other US COIs on the program, we can transfer funding to them. If there are no other US investigators, then funding would just be relinquished. And if there was no other investigator that could step in, right? Even if an investigator wasn't named, right, but you're leaving, and someone says, hey, I can do that work, that's a possibility too. It's all vetted.
All right, great. Thanks, Paula. So I think we sort of addressed this, but I just want to circle back. So the section in the table in section 1, the level of effort table, which only includes investigators who are contributing 5% or more to the science, that carries through to section 3, correct? Where they only have to mention the effort for investigators who are contributing more than 5% to the science. Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Great. So the answer to that is yes. Another question about ground-based observations. Is it possible to allocate more than 10% of the total budget to ground-based observations in joint proposals, e.g. JWST, ALMA, KEC?
Yes, so it is possible to request more than 10% if there is a strong justification for it. I mean, if you're over by 1 or 2%, it's not a big deal, but if you're asking for quite a bit more support, then it gets into other issues, right? Like based on funding each observatory provides, what opportunities for proposal submissions they have with the other observatories. So yeah, if it's more than 10%, just make sure that it is explicitly justified why those costs are needed, why that effort is needed.
All right, great. We only have a few more questions. What justification is needed for a no-cost extension?
So with no-cost extensions, a little bit of background with the 3-year period of performance for grant awards. Years ago, we gave a 2-year period of performance with the option to request a 1-year no-cost extension. To eliminate some of the administrative burden for us and for the institutions, we extended the period of performance to 3 years, thinking that that would cover a good part of the no-cost extension requests that we would get. If you need a no-cost extension request, right, there needs to be a very strong justification for that request, and we only entertain a 1-year no-cost extension unless there are extenuating circumstances, in which case we would do.
Can I request funding to fully or partially cover a team meeting with all program co-Is that is not held in the US?
We would need more details.
All right, and then we have a few questions clarifying the period of performance and the budget period. So I can talk to that a little bit. So we issue our grants with a period of performance of 3 years. As Paula mentioned, we may approve a no-cost extension if there are extenuating circumstances. The 3 years essentially incorporates, an additional 12 months into the 3-year period of performance. We expect the budget period to be 1 to 2 years for most programs. So we expect that budget requests will not include more than 24 months of labor effort per person. Those are all the questions that we have received online. Are there any other questions that anyone has that we can address? Is it at all possible to delay the start of the grants? That's a question that just came in.
We would have to know what reason it was. You can ask and tell us what the reason is. We generally don't delay the start. You can always contact us and see what we can work with.
Great. So Paula, those are all of the questions online. I just want to reiterate, if you have any questions that come up, if we weren't able to answer your question specifically today, feel free to reach out. We're here to help, so we would love to chat through your question or concern with you and see how we can help you. I don't see any more questions online, so Paula, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Casey, I had one more thought about continuation programs that I didn't mention during the presentation, is that you have a continuation program. When you submit the budget, submit a budget for only the first year of that continuation program. Do not include 2 years or 3 years, however long the continuation program exists. So each new cycle, you will submit an independent budget for the work related to that, the data analysis for that cycle. So don't triple, right, the first year's budget if you have a 3-year continuation program. But it is helpful to give an overview of the entire program so we can get a feel for the work overall and the resources requested to complete. And any other questions, you can just reach out to us, email us, call us. We're here to help. And don't forget to get in touch with the budget deadlines May 8th. So definitely be in touch with your sponsor programs offices at your institutions. They're great help. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate the questions and hope that we've been able to provide some helpful information. And I know that we are just going to see 100% star budget submissions this year. I just know it. If not, we'll be having more of these sessions. So, all right. Thanks everyone for attending, and look forward to the posting of the Q&A and the slides and the recording.